Hello everyone, my name is Carlos. Welcome to It's Complicated. Today we're going to be looking at one of the most hyped watches of 2023, the Christoper Ward the 12. Do you want to know if this watch actually deserves the amount of hype that it gets? We're going to find out in this review. So this is Christoper Ward's the 12, a watch with a kind of a funny name, but a watch that nonetheless has been super hyped this year and has been considered one of the most groundbreaking watches in the affordable luxury market. Before we go any further into this review, I do want to thank the folks over at Christoper Ward for letting me borrow this review unit. I do not get to keep this watch. This watch will be going back, and all of my opinions are my own, and they didn't get any say in the making of this review. So I've covered Christoper Ward watches before. Most recently, I did a review on the Moonglow. If you want to check that video, I'll put a link somewhere on the side over here. But for those of you that are new to the brand, Christoper Ward used to kind of be this micro brand that was kind of a small mom and pop shop that made amazing Swiss watches. But in the last couple of years, I would say maybe in the last 2 years, they've really come out strong, trying to break away from that micro brand model and really establish themselves as a solid, full-fledged Swiss watchmaking company. Some of the watches that have really paved the way for them to be able to do this has been the Bel Canto, which is one of the first affordable watches with a charming complication, and this watch right here, the Christoper Ward the 12. So before we get into the fit and finish, I do want to point out that this particular watch is a review unit, so that means that it's had some love bruises along the way by other folks that have reviewed this exact same watch and don't take as good care of the watches as I do out of respect to the people that let me borrow them. So as far as fit and finish goes, I think that this is actually a watch with great fit and finish for the price. You will mostly see brushed surfaces with all of the hard edges beveled and polished to give this watch a very elegant look that's basically right of the Genta book of watch design, really giving this watch that aesthetic of the 70s that people really seem to enjoy. As far as the case goes, I feel like this is where Christoper Ward has spent most of its time, where you can really see sort of like that industrial square, multiple angles, yet somewhat minimalistic case come to form to just give us like that really elegant, sharp look that is so popular in these Gentas inspired type of watches. With the bezel really tying the watch by being kind of like the most complicated part and giving us that 12-sided shape with multiple finishes that are both brushed and satinized and also polished to just add multiple surfaces to catch and play with light and give us an overall very simple yet complex yet beautiful set of surfaces that really tie this watch together and just make it feel like a much more expensive offering. One of my favorite parts of this watch is actually the dial, which is kind of a brick pattern of Swiss crosses that just do a really good job at playing with the light and just looking really beautiful and really intricate. You can really see how this dial is a lot more complicated than something that you would find on the PRX line from Tissot. One of the other things that I think that Christoper Ward did really well on this watch is also the dial markers, which are much bigger and have dual finish and really nice polished edges that really catch light and sparkle, that, in my opinion, makes it look much more expensive than something like your standard Tissot PRX. The dial is matched with these beautiful kind of sword hand styles that have also dual finishing. They have this really nice sort of brush line in the middle with their edges or the sort of sharp part of the hands polished. And it's one of those details that Christoper Ward puts on their watches that always makes their watches just feel so premium. At the 6 o'clock of the dial, you will find a really nice date wheel that has been very well integrated into the watch, with the date wheel itself color matching the color of the dial. Right on top of the hands, you will see the Christoper Ward logo, which has been overlaid in this really sort of shiny metal that's also been brushed. And once again, just another item on the dial that adds a little bit of depth to the dial, as well as another surface that the light can play off. To finish up the dial, on the outside of the markers, you will see a really nice track with minute markers that have been printed on the surface. The back of the watch does feature a display case back where we can see the beautiful Selita SW200 movement, which is not the base model, but one that has just slightly more decoration than the base model. So you can see this extra kind of knurling on the bridges and that give it a little bit more flair and shininess over your regular sort of satinized run-of-the-mill SW200. On the back, you will notice 6 screws holding putting together the case back to the watch. And we'll see also a repetition of that 12-sided shape repeated on the case back of the watch. As we move away from the case and dial, we get into the bracelet. And to be honest, I think that the bracelet's partly what's going to bring most people to this watch. The bracelet is this beautiful integrated bracelet, which is incredibly popular at the moment. And it's made up of these really nice, really well-machined Y-style links that have been very nicely beveled on the edges of the bracelet and also have been very nicely beveled in between the links to create what looks like a simple surface, but as the bracelet itself wraps around your wrist, you will start seeing all of these extra surfaces that catch light, continue that motif of light play on the wrist. The clasp is a beautifully branded Christoper Ward butterfly clasp, and one of the things that's really nice about this particular bracelet is that usually these type of clasps really suffer from, they're just not the most adjustable, but on this particular bracelet, Christoper Ward did a really good job of including both big links and small links, so you should be able to play around with moving either small links or big links to get the correct size for your wrist. So now we get into the nerdy part of the review, which is basically the accuracy. So one thing to note about this Christoper Ward watch is that it's the 40mm version that is not titanium, so it doesn't have the chronometer grade movement. It actually has an Elabore SW200 movement in it, and the SW200 that's in this particular watch, while it's not the bottom grade, is only one level above, which I believe is just has like slightly better shock protection for the balance wheel. So with that said, when we put this watch on the chronograph, we did notice that across 6 positions, the average time loss or time gain in this particular case was plus 6 seconds a day, with the slowest time being plus 1 second per day and the fastest time being 12 seconds per day, giving us a delta of 11 seconds. This is still in spec for the movement, but it wasn't anything that was super great about it. However, with that said, I do think that this watch could be regulated to be a little bit more accurate. And that's one of the things that I love about the SW200 versus something like the Powermatic on the Tissot, is that the SW200 actually has like a fine regulation screw that's really easily accessible, that pretty much anybody with a screwdriver and a little bit of patience and a time grapher could use to regulate their watch and make them more accurate without really like worrying about damaging the watch. All right, so now that we've talked about accuracy, let's take a second to talk about price. So this particular watch retails for $1,200. Now, this is the stainless steel 40mm version of the watch, and I think a lot of people on the internet immediately want to compare this to something like a Tissot PRX, which is a $500 watch that has a lot of similarities. It has an automatic movement, very similar to the SW200. And it's also one of these integrated bracelet kind of industrial design 70s new vintage kind of watches, right? However, I think that comparing the 12 to the PRX is just a completely unfair comparison, because the reality is that this watch is 2 to 3 times the watch that the PRX is. It has the better case, it has the better bracelet, it has the better movement in my opinion, it has a better dial, it has a better bezel, it has better hands, and it has better markers. Like everything about this watch is just turned up to 11 compared to something like a standard PRX Powermatic. However, I think that if people are cross-shopping PRX and Christoper Ward, for $1,200, what you need to compare it to is actually the PRX chronograph that features the Value movement. So the thing to understand about the PRX chronograph is that you have the more expensive, better, more complicated, more complication movement on the PRX chronograph. I do think that there is room to argue which is actually better, and this is where people should really focus. The thing that the Christoper Ward the 12 does really, really well is the thinness. Even on the normal stainless steel version of this watch, you have a case that's under 10 millimeters. But if you look at something like the PRX chronograph, as I said, you're getting the better movement, but the catch is that those are much, much thicker watches. And that's really where I think the debate is going to be. Like, I think that if you're okay with thicker watches that just wear, we're talking about maybe 4 to 5 millimeters more than this watch, then you can spend the same money and get a more interesting movement that is much, much, much cooler. However, if you're the type of person that really finds elegance, and there's definitely something to be said about the elegance and the sophistication of thin watches, then the Christoper Ward the 12 is obviously the one for you, because that's the one that is thin, that's the one that is the most elegant, and that's the one that feels like more natural in design, even though for the price, you're not getting a movement that is maybe the coolest movement that you could get. All right, so let's finish up this with likes and dislikes. Honestly, there's a lot to like about this watch. I really love the way that it wears. I love the lightness. I love the thinness of the watch. I think that the overall presence, wearing experience, and sophistication of this watch is like right on point. I think that I do understand why people are so hyped about this particular watch, because honestly, it is, if you like this style of watches, it is sort of like that perfect amalgamation of that Genta sort of line of design, but like a relatively affordable price. So as far as dislikes go, I wouldn't say that I really have a lot of dislikes. However, I do think that there's a couple of missed opportunities on this watch. I would have loved to have seen a more decorated level of movement inside of this watch. So one of the things that's interesting about the Selita movements is that Selita has multiple grades of movements, and the grades are kind of like levels of accuracy. And then they have multiple levels of decoration. So that means that you can get one of their maybe not so high level of accuracy movements, but you can highly decorate it. And they do all of the decoration, and they do sort of like all of the tuning for the movement. So this means that these movements are kind of just sort of like dropped in place by the different watchmakers that use them. So with all of this said, I think that it would have been really nice if Christoper Ward would have opted to put a slightly more decorated version of this movement in the watch, just because the entire watch just has like so much light play, and it's just such a beautiful watch that having a little bit of extra level to decoration to the use of the case back, I really think would have put this watch at another level. It would have just made this watch, and it would have made this watch kind of a no-brainer. Other than that, the only other thing that was a little bit weird to me, but I think it makes sense, is the crown was a little bit small. I have big hands, I have 7.5-inch wrists, and I have some really meaty paws. So sometimes operating the crown was a little bit of a chore. But with that said, I don't necessarily think that the watch needs a bigger crown, because I do think that putting a bigger crown would actually sort of ruin the aesthetics of the watch somewhat. But it's just something to know about the watch. A watch like this might have a little bit of an annoying crown to sort of operate. So my final thoughts on this watch is that Christoper Ward has actually really blown me away. Even though when this watch came out, I was a little bit skeptical when I saw things on paper based on the price that they were offering things at. I do think that everything about this watch is properly priced. I think that the price is very good for what you're getting. I am very impressed by the design of the watch, the execution of the watch, and just the overall feel. To be honest, when I pulled this watch out of the box, my first impression was like, oh wow. It was definitely like kind of a slap in the face, you know, kind of like a wake up and look at me. Definitely was caught by surprise by just how appealing and what an attention grabber this watch is from the moment you pull it out of the box. I think that this watch is definitely worth your time if you're looking into getting one. I think that if you're into this particular aesthetic type, that you should definitely pick one up for the price if you're considering it. And if you're thinking about, well, what size should I get? Should I get a 36? Should I get a 38? Should I get the titanium version? As I said, I don't think that anybody should really get the titanium version. Like, I just don't think the titanium brings that much to the watch, because this particular one, the stainless steel, is just so thin and so light and wears so nicely that I feel titanium's not really necessary. However, if you do want a more decorated movement and you want a watch that's going to be COSC certified, then definitely get the titanium one. That's really what you're paying for at that time. And you're gonna get a watch that's slightly thinner, that runs better, but that level of decoration on those guys is definitely much nicer. However, the question is going to be, like, is just getting a nicer movement really worth $800 more, or whatever the difference is? So for me, I don't know. I think that I would stick to this particular version on the bracelet at $1,200. I think it's great. So if you do have smaller wrists and 40 millimeters sounds like something too big, Christoper Ward offers a 36 millimeter version. And to be honest, my favorite colorway of this watch is actually in 36 millimeter, and that's that white dial with gold hands. I think that that looks beautiful. I'm actually kind of jealous that they don't have that in 40 millimeters, because I think that if they had that watch in 40 millimeters, I would totally pick one up. With that said, that's pretty much been the review of the 12. Tell me what you guys think. What do you guys think about my comparison of getting a 12 versus a PRX chronograph? I feel like nobody's really talking about the PRX chronograph, which is more similarly priced to the 12, and nobody's really spending the time to compare these two. So tell me, what do you guys think? Do you think that, one, this watch is priced correctly? And two, would you rather have this or the PRX chronograph? Let me know in the comments, please. I really try to answer every single comment when people participate. So anyways, yes, I just really appreciate you guys watching this video, and hopefully I'll see you guys on the next one. Thanks for watching, guys.